Thank you for joining us at the Nest Summit. Today we're talking about renewables and addressing commercial trends in renewables and decarbonization. I'm joined today by Matt Breidert from Ecofin Tortoise. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much.
So Matt, the world of renewables and decarbonization is certainly a very complex world. What are you seeing in industry trends that is really something to speak about today?
Yeah, so I think we can first look at the technologies that are being deployed on a commercial basis. The biggest focus today are clearly around wind and solar power. Hydropower continues to see some growth in emerging markets, particularly in Southeast Asia and Africa. And geothermal resources are getting some development, but it's more limited in scale. So maybe we can focus a little bit on wind and solar more specifically. On the wind side, the industry started onshore about 20 years ago with relatively low towers, modest-sized blades, modest-sized turbines. And over the past 10 to 15 years, each one of those components has gotten bigger. The tower sizes have grown by 2x or 3x. The size of the blades on the equipment have gotten much larger, and the turbines have grown in size. All of those have conspired to drive down costs over time. In some cases, the technology innovations were the result of needing to effectively solve a problem. For example, there were problems with bird accidents early on, and so the towers went up to mitigate from that problem. In doing so, the industry found quite a bit better wind resource at that higher tower level, and in fact improved efficiency. Additionally, over time, we've added new technologies such as drones, which can actually predict which way the wind is going to blow in advance of it hitting the wind turbine equipment and improving the overall efficiency. So that's driven a big, long decline in cost on a efficiency basis or overall output basis over the last 10 to 15 years. We see some of that technology now becoming a bit more mature, and the industry is starting to transition to offshore wind. And this really got going about 8 years ago with some subsidies that came out of Europe. And very quickly, the industry is going to a much larger scale than we've seen onshore. So some of the advantages of offshore wind include much higher wind speeds, more prevalence of wind, an ability to access a very large field or area to build a large project, unfettered access to area. In some cases, you can get an extremely large spread of a wind farm and build on add-on projects. So the scale of the industry is quite large in that regard. But also, there's really no limitation to the size of the equipment. Onshore, of course, you have deployment issues on roads and things like that, just logistics, getting these projects built. Offshore, it's a lot easier. So the scale of the industry is quite significantly larger. If you look today, we have 8 megawatt turbines offshore. GE has just created and commercialized a new technology that's a 12 megawatt turbine. That's already 50% larger than the industry today. All of that augurs for a rapid cost decline path over the next decade and very substantial size installations coming. The last area within renewables is solar, of course, which everybody's very familiar with. And inside solar, the main technology today is photovoltaic. We started in the industry with solar thermal technology, but that has become cost ineffective. And inside photovoltaic, there's a bunch of reasons why that technology will continue to prevail. The first one would be, of course, it's modular. It's very easy to build a project quickly. And at the same time, the cost continues to come down as the manufacturing scale expands. So we think solar PV is around to stay for quite a while.
Matt, while we're hearing great news from the renewable side of the market on a frequent basis, we also hear, when we hear the public heads of fossil fuel companies speaking, that there will just never be a point where renewables and alternative energy will meet the demand of energy in this world. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, it's a fair point that there are certain limitations to renewable technologies today as they're currently contemplated. The great thing about technology and innovation is that you can come up with solutions for a lot of those problems that aren't always apparent. So I think we can all concede the point that solar photovoltaic, for example, can only be an intermittent resource. The sun is only shining half the hours of the day, or in some cases, like me in London, even less. And the reality is that's just a limitation to what could be available. However, if you have battery technology that can be complemented with that solar technology, and the battery technology grows in improvement in energy density or in cost per unit, then you can actually expand the size of that original solar project to accommodate filling a battery and therefore creating a much larger footprint of availability of that resource over time. Now, additionally, we think that it's likely that renewable technologies will be used as a precursor energy to effectively creating a green hydrogen industry. And if you could create a green hydrogen industry and effectively have zero carbon hydrogen available, either as an end source fuel or as a precursor fuel to making more complex zero net carbon hydrocarbons, then that's actually a way you could store renewable electricity inside a liquid molecule. So we think we're really only at the very beginning of the energy transition side as the applicability of these resources to get piggy to market, as you would say.
So that drives me to my next point. What is driving demand and infrastructure build out today? Are we seeing it come more from economic policy, or are we seeing it come more from just the actual business merit of renewables in the marketplace?
Yeah, it's a great question, and of course they're somewhat complementary. The industry was certainly started within a framework of strong support via public policy, and that namely was coming from direct subsidies and incentive feed-in tariffs. Looking around the world today, those have largely run their course, with the exception of the U.S., which continues to subsidize the industry via federal tax credits. But by and large, these programs are all running out or have already sunset, and the industry is operating on an economic heads-up basis. Now, policy support continues to be important, but it's just kind of evolved now into a different guise, and that is, what is the overall decarbonization target for the overall economy? And we see differences in jurisdictions around the world. If you look at the EU, we have the Green Deal, and that is driving effectively all industry inside the EU to decarbonize almost completely by 2050, sort of no facet of the economy left untouched. That is a very key support driver to underwrite corporate activities to come up with solutions to achieve that goal. If you look in the US, we don't necessarily have specific carbon policy or even decarbonization policy, but we do have at state level or even sometimes city level renewable portfolio standards that are driving behavior by load-serving entities, by commercial customers, and other companies that are operating in those jurisdictions. And then lastly, I think corporates really operate under a completely different framework. They are very focused on the economic realities of their business and what commercial opportunities are there. The reality is, if you're looking at a new build need for electricity today in particular, renewables are already the lowest cost option. On top of that, you're going to get effectively a fixed cost over a 20 or 30-year life. For a lot of corporates, just having that certainty of the cost is extremely valuable to them. So we would continue to think that a mixture of public policy support and increasing economic merit really are the key drivers of the industry.
Matt, let's talk about specific demand that you're seeing within the industry and take us out the next 10 or 20 years. What do you think we'll be seeing in the world of renewables over that time period?
I think there's sort of four key drivers around renewable infrastructure growth. And within renewable infrastructure growth, we're highly focused on wind, solar, battery, and then the development of green hydrogen as the key technologies to effectively drive that industry. So the first area of demand is really what I'll call manufacturing or commercial operations. These are going to be from large multinational corporates like Apple, Amazon, IKEA, and Unilever, who are all making very firm commitments inside their business to a sustainability platform and way they're going to operate their business. By way of example, in the case of Apple, they've recently announced that by 2030, all of their products that they manufacture will be zero net carbon in footprint. That obviously means that they have to go to their subcomponent suppliers, their contractors, all the little bits and bobs that go into that Apple iPhone, and effectively tell them, you have to be zero net carbon. We think the impact of these policy changes by corporates could be the most dramatic driver for the industry. There's a great example recently in Taiwan. Taiwan Semiconductor, which is one of the most sophisticated semiconductor manufacturing technology companies in the world, just announced the largest single offshore wind project ever. and that is effectively to underwrite their ability to manufacture for Apple, their biggest customer, the future. And we think we're at the very tip of the arrow of new projects like that being announced that complement these big multinational policy goals. So that's a key area. The second key area is one I think everybody knows about, which is this transition to electric vehicles, which is being driven first and foremost by the big disruptor Tesla, but increasingly now all of the auto manufacturers around the world are getting in on the act of starting to change their platforms to address the EV transition. Ultimately, if you're going to switch from an oil-based fuel to an electricity, it makes common sense that you're going to need a decarbonized electricity in order to achieve the efficiency goals in emission reduction that are required by numerous jurisdictions, including the EU and around Asia. And we think that if you waved a magic wand today and you could effectively have every car on the road already be electric, it would be almost a 20% increase in total power demand globally. Now, that obviously is a pretty big number, but it's also over a period of 2 or 3 decades quite achievable. We think renewables will underwrite that. The third area is around green hydrogen, and there are going to be industries that simply can't use electricity to decarbonize. I think airplanes are probably most likely to be much slower to think about electricity as an alternative. And what we really need to do is to decarbonize liquid fuels so that those industries can continue to operate and function in a way they're already very, very good industries and efficient. They just need to decarbonize the fuel. Using renewables to create green hydrogen is a great way to effectively let those planes that are currently using kerosene to start using potentially clean kerosene or alternate polymers of hydrocarbons that are based on zero net carbon with green hydrogen. The last area, of course, is just around utilities. And utilities continue to decarbonize via renewable growth because it's now become very good business for them. You know, I think all businesses selfishly operate to figure out what's a way that I can help my customer and help myself. Well, the utilities now can deploy renewable resources, put down or retire early some of their existing fossil-based resources, and in the process, generate more income for themselves and lower overall costs for their customers. So if we look in the US, a number of traditional utilities, even some of the largest coal-burning utilities, are now making very big changes to their platform, looking forward 10 years on introducing renewable resources.
Matt, we have time for one last question. Can you just talk about, we've talked about all the positive news in the renewable world. What is one of the biggest challenges that we face over the next 10 years in getting to net zero?
Well, I think we need to continue to have a robust treatment for market design. Anytime you have an industry in transition, you're going to have winners and losers. And how you deal with relative losers is really critical to getting everybody to move in the same direction. If you look at Alberta, Canada, which is certainly far more associated with a traditional energy resource platform, they've come up with a really great solution to phase out all coal over the next 10 years. They effectively are going to remunerate the owners of the coal plants to make the transition earlier than expected so that they don't suffer a financial injury. And they're incentivizing some of those same companies to now go build renewable resources or lower carbon emitting natural gas resources to rebuild the industry. And I think it's important to not leave behind these constituents that are existing or to abandon them economically, because if you do, you end up with a fight, you end up with politics. We see it today in the United States, and it's just not constructive for getting to the solution I think most people want to get to.
Matt, I want to thank you for joining us at Net Summit today and talking about climate for Climate Week and renewables. Really was a great pleasure having you.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.